everyone, and welcome to Redemption Thursdays with Rabbi Pinchas Winston. I'm your host, Yehuda Shamroth. I live in Ramat Beit Shemesh, Israel, and for many years now, I've been a Talmidah, a student of Rabbi Winston, learning his very deep, in-depth Torah regarding all kinds of Jewish issues, in particular, talking about the end of days, which is the name of one of his multiple books. Also learning about creation and how it relates to us now, learning about looking at the world through the eyes of the Torah, the eyes of Kabbalah, and the concepts. So if you're interested in these kinds of things, please visit Rabbi's websites. He's got two of them. One is 36.org that you can see under his name. The other one is sharnunproductions.org. And I also want to say this year is also co-hosted by Josh Wander, who was just written up at the Jerusalem Post. I don't know if you saw, but he's a big Aliyah advocate, and he's been over in America trying to drum up activity and interest in people making Aliyah right now, and he's there to help you. If you want to contact him, you can look at israeltorah.org, and it automatically changes names to bringthemhome.org, which explains the whole purpose of his website. But you can also watch the replays of Rabbi Winston's shiur on that YouTube channel. Thank you very much for joining us. Rabbi Winston, take it away.
Thanks. You can also go to my website, even if you're not interested in what I have to say. In any case, just back in the times of Yeshayahu, the prophet, Isaiah in English, and Yechezkel or Ezekiel, and Yirmiyahu or Jeremiah, that these were three of the biggest prophets we ever had, three of the most famous prophets that we ever had, and probably three of the toughest lives anybody could live. Very, very difficult lives because they're pretty much bearers of bad news almost all the time. I mean, Yeshaya does have words of the Chama. We read, a lot of from what he has to say, and also the other ones as well, that they do say some things about, some Nechama. But the thing about Nechama, which is consolate, it's, be comforting, and, consolation, that, it's like basically that it's like putting cream on a wound. In a sense, it does make it feel better, and it does help. That's the situation. But better not to have the wound at all. Better not to have to go through any of the suffering. And in between putting it on, it's like it's what you have to do, a Band-Aid. But it's better not to have to go through the situation in the first place and have to deal with anything like that. And health, of course, is a classic example of this idea. And there's many examples of this. But that was the situation, and the most amazing thing, and you look at the prophet Hosea, for example, and Hashem is telling Hosea to speak to the Jewish people and tell them what's coming up, what's going to be happening, because of what has gone on, and it's an absolutely remarkable thing. You read these forms, not like today. Today, we haven't had prophecy for thousands of years, and even for people who are religious, born religious, or become Bali Tshuva, it's exciting, but it's very hard to feel the reality of it like you once could. Back in the times of even the Second Temple time, but certainly the first period of time, the First Temple period, and earlier, I mean, the whole world was religious in one way or another way. It was either God or Avodah Zarah, idol worship, but the whole world was religious. It was very unusual for anyone to be an atheist and agnostic. People were real with this. So, historians would say, because they were so naive at that time, they didn't have to believe, they couldn't control the weather. Maybe Greeks for sure like that, but a lot of people, it's because they were real with the reality of God. They felt God, and they took seriously what the prophets were talking about, and it was palpable. It was more palpable. You could feel it. But we've of course got into tremendously long periods of Hester Pudding, where God hides his face, and the hiding of God's face means exactly what we feel today, and that is it's as if he's not here. Someone hides in a room, he can still be in the room, and you might be able to find him, but as long as he's hidden from you, it's as if he's not there. He's there, but it doesn't feel like he's there because it's a consciousness thing. If you have to see and smell and hear and touch and all these things to make things real to you, and we don't have that today so much. And even people who believe in God and believe in Torah and living by Torah mitzvahs, again, I always use an example, but it is one of the best examples. Just look at the way people are performing mitzvahs. Look at the way people daven to Hashem every single day. It's not like our lives depend. We don't daven. Our lives do depend upon it, but it's as if they don't. So today it's a much more difficult thing to be real with the reality of God. So in that respect, maybe God has more rahmanis on us, because look at the world. The fact that we're still here talking about it is hugely significant. It means that God is very, very, very forbearing, because the world is very far from what it seems to be the purpose of history. But back in those times, they were prophets. I mean, real prophets of God. It was so real to even the people who rebelled against God that they had to create false prophets to kind of counterbalance the real prophets. Today you might call a scientist a false prophet, or somebody who says things against the Torah as a false prophet. But it's not the same thing. I mean, those people claimed to prophecy in the name of God. And it's just that they didn't. They just made it up, or they stole prophecies from other prophets instead. But they had to have false prophets, because that's how much they still believed in God, and yet they still rebelled against him. They still went against him. They still angered him. They still did the avodah zarah, the idol worship. They still did all the terrible affairs that Achav and Izabel and all these other characters from Jewish history did. Terrible stuff, travesties of justice and Torah and murder, and you name it. I mean, like the three biggies, these guys were committing them, even though they knew that God was real. And it's a big question mark as to how that's possible, how that could possibly be. But one thing is for sure, that they got warned over and over and over again. And Yeshaya, he was killed in the end because of his prophecy. And Yirmiyahu, they wanted to kill him too, and he suffered terribly. They burned his prophecies. And Yechezkel maybe less so, but nonetheless, you're not popular amongst people. You're not very popular for giving negative prophecies and negative statements of being negative in life. It's not a very even if it's for the good of something. You're trying to save lives, as they were trying to save lives, but that's not the way it was viewed. It was more like, you're a party pooper. You're just a very it's like, it's depressing to be around someone like you. So get lost, and that's the way they live their life. So it was a dichotomy, because on one hand God's talking to them, which means that God likes them and trusts them and favors them, but the people that they had to live amongst were the opposites to a large degree. And God wasn't stopping that, because God can do whatever he wants. He can make people like you, just the way he can make people not like you. He can make people like you. He can control everything. He can make your life very smooth, as he has. I mean, where do we see this? By Lavan, right? Lavan didn't like Yaakov. You see, we say in the Haggadah, right? Avi, right, that he wanted to kill our father. It's in Devarim, in the Parshas Bikurim. We talk about the Arami who was Lavan, and he wanted to kill Yaakov Avinu, his son-in-law. So why didn't he? Because God stopped him. Because God put it into his heart for 20 some odd years, really actually less, 14 years, to be nice to Lavan. Just like the Americans have been nice to us for decades, and in Canada we had a good time of it. In England, I don't know. You hear different things, but it's been much better period of Jewish history for the last 60, 70 years, and we've known a long time, and it's not because people are more civil. That we learned the hard way in World War II. One of the reasons why we had a tough time believing that Germany could become Nazi Germany was because the Germans were the most advanced society at that time, the most intellectual society at that time. And people thought that anti-Semitism was fading, was going away, because people were becoming smarter, more distracted by success. The Industrial Revolution was changing the world very dramatically. Likewise, in the 1990s, people thought that anti-Semitism also had passed away and passed on, and that you wouldn't need things anymore, like the Anti-Defamation League and things that protect us, or at least keep us aware of what's going on in anti-Semitism. But it's back and ferociously back. And I remember in the 1990s when I first began to learn about the topic of the end of days, and I did not go looking for it, that's for sure. It's not high in my agenda. The whole concept of Mashiach was still kind of like awkward for me. But I kept seeing things, and I kept noticing Jewish history, and mostly ever since I began working on my first book, which included a timeline about anti-Semitism, which forced me to do the research into the last 2,000 years of anti-Semitism, and it was mind-opening, eye-opening, and mind-blowing for that matter. and extremely difficult to go through, especially in a couple sittings. But you learn a lot, and you see just it's like incessant over and over and over again. And even though at that time, 1990, 1992, 3, whatever, the world was still quite nice. Life in North America was extremely pleasant. Okay, we had economy problems like the .com era, and then savings and loans that fell out in the 1980s, and other things that went wrong, but they went wrong for everybody. They weren't targeted at the Jewish people, and a lot of times the Jewish people somehow rose above it. They somehow were not as affected, not everybody at least, were as affected by what was going on in the rest of the world. So as far as we were concerned, life was, pretty good. We don't mind suffering a little bit if everyone's suffering at the same time. We don't want it. Nobody wants it, but it's certainly a lot easier when you're not the only one and it's not targeted at you. And then things began to change, and we can see exactly where they began to change and even why they began to change and how they began to change. But the reality is that they changed, and the situation got worse again. And I remember predicting that. When I say predicting it, it wasn't really a prediction. It was just a statement of fact based upon thousands of years of Jewish history. It's like, for example, in a family line, if a person, their grandfather, we have a history of hernias in our family. My grandfather had a hernia, my father had a hernia. I have hernia, my sons have hernias. It's like you can almost expect that somebody born in the family from that line is going to have a hernia because genetically that's just going to be the case, and other things too. Everyone in that family loses their hair or whatever. It's genetic, right? So the same thing. It seems to be genetic to Jewish history. I remember sitting at Shabbos tables, back in Toronto, and having these discussions, and I'm like trying to warn people. I'm not contrary to popular thought, or not, it's not popular thought, but some people think maybe perhaps that I can't wait to see the war of Gog and Magog take place. I can't wait to see these prophecies come true, so I can say it's told you so, and then no, not at all. Quite frankly, I'm one of the first in line who would love to see us transition very nicely and neatly and peacefully to Yemoseh Mashiach. I want Mashiach to come. I definitely want Yemoseh Mashiach to start. I want the evil gone from the world, like any normal person hopefully would want. But I don't want to go through the transition of Chali Mashiach, that's for sure. But it seems inevitable. And back then, to say it seems inevitable was a tough sell, because it didn't really seem to be showing itself at that time, even though the Intifada had already begun in the 1980s, and it was really winds of time, what was coming, of change. And also Operation Galilee, I remember very specifically, Newsweek writing an article saying that the Jewish people could no longer use the Holocaust as an excuse to fight wars anywhere they want to. And we were like today, you're protecting the North. Like, they got it so wrong. Like, how can they it's so incredibly wrong. It's like the sugar now, how like, it's like we sit here, they think that we sit here in war cabinets and war rooms saying, what's the next war we can fight? What's the next one we can instigate? What's the next thing we can fight over? That's what Hamas does. That's what the air has been doing. That's what our enemies have been doing. As the Haggadah says, in every generation they rise up to destroy us, because that's what they do, not us. If you come here and you see what's going on in the streets and you see how people live their lives, war is the last thing anybody wants. We would love to get along. If all the Arabs were to say, okay, you're here to stay. We see that. You survived the test of time. Okay, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of energy. It's a waste of money. Let's make peace like other countries have done. This is where we can work on ourselves financially. You can work on yourself, and we can all be happy to do business together and prosper, because that's the name of the game. To do that for us and our children after us and the children, generations after that, right? Who wants to go to war? If that would be the case, we turn our tanks into, I guess, plowshares, things like, whatever we could, because we don't want it. It's a waste of our time. It's a waste of our money. It's certainly a waste of our blood. That's for sure. Like, we lost a lot of it. Oh, the PLO, they need land. They have land. They were given the land. We sacrificed our own people to give them land. If they would just simply, say, okay, well, we got the money, we got the land, we got everything we need now. Now, we don't have Israel. Fine, that's their place. They get used to it. Go with the program. Let's develop this and turn it into a homeland, and then we'll see where it goes from there. There'll be peace everywhere, all over the Middle East and the whole rest of the world. But that's not the case. We're forced to have to go to war and disrupt our lives and spend money on things we don't want to spend money on. And, that's just the way it seems to go. And it's getting worse, not better. And anti-Semitism is getting worse and not better. It is weird. I mean, it's always weird. It always doesn't make sense. It's never logical. I mean, you go back to the 1930s and the 1940s, and you see what's being published. Published all the propaganda against the Jews at that time. Ridiculous. The Jewish people normally, especially the secular ones, but the Jewish people normally, they don't go to disrupt the place they're going to. They might run for politics, but they do it as one of the people of that nation. The German Jews, 100,000, did not leave because they were loyal to Germany, despite what was already going on inside of Germany. They're probably more loyal to their host countries than most host people are to their host country. And they work hard, and they pay their taxes, and they support the government, and they do all kinds of chasadim, all kinds of, they're the least worrisome component of the population. And contrary to all the anti-Semitic propaganda, there's no such thing as a protocol of elders of Zion. We have no plans to take over the world. If it happens, mamela, because we just become so successful at what we do, what are you going to do? We have to turn our backs on success? Well, maybe sometimes a little bit, just for the sake of peace. But there's no conspiracy of Jews sitting down and figuring out how. There is maybe of Gentiles. There is of very powerful, wealthy people who sit there every day, and have conferences secretly to decide how they're going to manipulate governments to do what they want. There is that. I 100% believe it's documented, but not the Jewish people. Just leave us alone. If anything, you see, we'll destroy ourselves, right? If anything, you'll see that we'll just leave us alone. That's the famous old sarcastic joke about the Jewish people. If you want to defeat us, right? Leave us alone. You want to lose the war? Attack us. We'll band together, more or less, and fight against you, because now we have a common cause. And that seems to be the pattern through history. And Yeshaya spoke about it, and Yechezkel spoke about it, and I was just pointing it out at the Shabbos table and the earfuls I used to get were unbelievable. Like, people just didn't want to hear about it. Everyone kept saying, no, it could be a happy ending. We can ride from the sunset together with God. And yes, some individuals do and some individuals will. As a whole, as a nation, it's not the cards. And if you think that's me, that's not me speaking. That's Jewish history speaking. And not just Jewish history speaking, but that's the Vilna Gaon speaking, and that's the Ramchal speaking, and that's Chazal speaking, and those are the sources speaking, and those are the Nevi'im speaking. And yes, it's true. Negative prophecies don't have to come true. But when was the last time a negative prophecy didn't come true? Just list them. Tell me what they are. I'd love to know what they are. They don't have to. I agree. Everybody agrees. They don't have to. But when was the last time they didn't? And why do they still come true anyhow? Because no one believes in them. Because no one takes them seriously. The base at Mikdash was destroyed. It wasn't like God said, oh, here I am. Surprise! He didn't do that. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. It took hundreds of years of warning. I'm going to do it. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. It's right. Ad kedei kach, until the very end. That they're still serving the base of Mikdash and Avodah Zarah at the same time. In the base of Mikdash, it's absolutely mind-boggling. So we have to assume, as the Gemara does point out, that there's been kind of a change in the nature of human beings in the last 1,000, 2,000 years. We don't relate today to the way it once was. That the Gemara makes clear, and history seems to make clear. So it's kind of hard to relate to then based upon what we know now today, right? But some things just don't change, and it's just the exact same way. And anyhow, isn't it better to be safe than sorry? Isn't that the expression? Isn't that what we're told to do? Rather than, no, just naysay and cognitive dissonance and pretend that somehow by ignoring it, it will go away on its own. Never does. And we see, there are warnings today from all kinds of places about the situation and how it's developing in the States alone, and Canada too, and it's advanced because the people who are talking about it are people who 10 years ago would not talk about it, and 20 years ago didn't even believe it was possible, the way things were going. But the first and most important point to remember is anti-Semitism is from God. It doesn't follow the regular rules. It follows God's plan for creation. Racism is something like hunger, right? You get hungry because your stomach empties out, you digest your food, and if you don't get more food, you're going to die from starvation. So therefore, God built the body in such a way that when it gets empty, the tank gets empty, lights go off, sounds get made, bells go, just like, in your car, it starts to ding because you get too close to empty, to make sure you don't get stuck on the highway with no gas. And yes, some people still do. But it's the same idea. Racism is just a natural part of the world, of being human with the Yetzer Hara. The same way we overeat, the same way that we speak Lashon Hara, the same way that we use foul language, the same way that we do all kinds of other abusive things. So also we abuse people too, and that's part of racism. But that's not anti-Semitism. It looks like racism. It even smells like it sometimes. But if you look at it and you analyze it, you see it's not true. And the Torah itself tells you that, and Chazal tell you that, and that's why the prophecies are all valid thousands of years later. Because if it was based upon natural tendencies, there'd be no way to know 3,000 years ago what the natural tendencies are going to be of mankind 3,000 years in the future. Now, that's what prophecy is all about. That's what prophecy is all about. I mean, prophecy is talking about things that you can't know through natural means. So God told them to, and that's true, by the way. There's no question. That's part of the equation. But the main part of the equation is that God has a purpose for all of history. He has a purpose for the Jewish people. Everything is rooted in events going back to the 6 days of creation, which are rooted in what took place prior to creation. And that's another thing too, also, by the way, it's just, also very mind-blowing. And that is, before I learned any Kabbalah, I was under the impression that history began with creation. Or at least our history did begin with creation, but the history of everything, right? If there's going to be a Big Bang, it was by the base of Bereshis. And maybe it was somewhere around there, because we're talking physical anyhow. But you look at the Kabbalah and the Zohar and all that, and the Rizal, that's like someone saying that a baby's conceived right before birth. Conceived, develops, boom, right before birth. And the medics and the scientists will tell you, what are you talking about? That's a long, ongoing development process that begins at a point you can't even see, right? Even before the husband and wife might even get together to have a child. There's already things going on inside the body, going back to puberty, to prepare the way for things like that. It's all beyond eye shot. So likewise, the early stages of creation, what we call creation, are really the middle of the process. And what's even more incredible is that what happened prior to creation has more to say about what's going to happen after creation than what happened at creation. Because what happened at creation is just a product of what happened before creation. And yet no one knows about this stuff. And so that's why it's a quandary. That's why it's a conundrum. And that's why it's all these things, and the people, they can't put it together. They can't work it out. It just doesn't make sense based upon what they know about the world. But the truth is that the world is far more complicated. You can know more. It is available. It's not like it's a mystery that can't be broken. No, there is a lot more you can, but it takes time. It takes research, and you have to put the time into it to get it, because it's very hard to fake, very hard to learn it. Because one thing about the Word of God is that unlike physics and unlike business and even unlike medicine and things like that, you don't have to really assimilate the information into your personality and your psyche to be affected by it. It might not be a bad idea. It might help. But it's technical knowledge. You just have to know and understand what you're learning and what it means technically and how to apply it technically so that you can be successful technically. When it comes to philosophy, it comes to especially understanding Jewish history and what's going on, it's more than that. You just can't see the words. That's not enough. You can't just learn the ideas and discuss them. That's not enough. Because there's understanding. And there's understanding. We acknowledge that in everyday life. We know that. We know there's levels of understanding something. In the Shemona Esrei, we talk about, Tachani Ladam Das, right? Right? And from you comes Dea Bina Haskell. Dea means like knowledge, and Bina means understanding, and Haskell means discernment, integration, Seichel, wisdom, how to apply it. And that's what sets the tone for all of history. So if you understand that, and you're looking at the situation, and right now in 1995, it's all you can see it's changing. By the way, already by the Intifada, it was already changing, but not yet the way it is today. But that was the beginning of it, and the truth is, it goes back to 1948. It goes back before that. It goes to the Holocaust. You keep going back in time, you can find origin after origin after origin. Why do we have Chevlei Mashiach? Why is it Chevlei Mashiach? Right? Why is it even called Chevlei Mashiach? What does Chevlei Mashiach mean? The Gemara talks about this. The Ramchal talks about this. The Gemara talks about it. It uses the term Chevlei Mashiach, which means Chevlei are the birth pangs, right? That's the R. A woman has Chevlei Leida, meaning that before she gives birth, she has contractions and it's painful, and the body takes over, and it's preparing to eject the baby from the body. It's all part of this ongoing process, a very painful process for most people who give birth. Some are fortunate to somehow bypass most of that, but that's not the norm. Okay, and we learn from that to this. So therefore, we look at the coming of Mashiach as a birth process, very similar, right? In other words, it is even down to the point it talks about how for 9 months the nations of the world will take control of Eretz Yisrael, God forbid, and then there's the Chevlei Mashiach, and it corresponds to the 70 voices that the Ayelet calls out when she's giving birth, and that corresponds to the 70 years of Chevlei Mashiach. And then finally there's a birth, Mashiach, when the Mashiach finally emerges, and he comes and he's, and we get past the wars and all that. So then it's like the birth process that you celebrate, et cetera, et cetera. There's this comparison going through the entire thing. Is it incidental? Is it just the way it is? In other words, it's similar, and because it's similar, we borrow the terminology from Leda, or is there something deeper? And like, why is Chevlei Mashiach something we can avoid? Well, the Zohar says there are things, even the Gemara says, there are things you can do to avoid it on a personal level. On a personal level, for example, having all 3 Shabbos meals as Shabbos meals, mechubadik. Ideally, you wash for each one, which means you make sure you have an appetite for each one, which means having to plan your day so that you will, and how much you eat at each meal so that you're not full for Suda Shlishis, especially on the short winter days. The Halacha says that from the Gemara, right? Because somehow that protects you from Chevlei Mashiach. And in my book, Strategy for the End of Days, there's a whole chapter on that. And the other things you can do as well. The Zohar says anybody who learns the Zohar will be protected from Chevlei Mashiach and the war of Gog and Magog, and that's also spoken about. It's part of the same chapter, right? Things you can do to avoid Chevlei Mashiach, but really, on a national level, it doesn't seem that it's not in the cards. And the question is why? Why? What's the paradigm? So the original question you have to ask really is, why does she have to go through the Chevlei Leida in the first place? Because we know from the Medrash that's not the way it always was. Cain and Hevel were not born the way people are born today. They came out already as adults, already whole. There was no pain, no caring. Doesn't talk about carrying the child, but I imagine that wasn't part of, they didn't have 9 months to get born. They only had like an hour, so there wasn't much caring of anything at that point. And once they were, born, they were too heavy to be carried at all. So they were adults. And that was it. Birth was just like, hi, how you doing? Welcome to the world. Here's your room. And then all of a sudden, she eats and lays the dust of Hara, and boom. Adam gets punished with this, the snake gets punished with that, and womanhood gets punished with with giving birth, right? That's going to be painful, and whatever comes after that. And her desire will be to her husband. That's the Gemara. That's the pasuk says. So the last part, it kind of makes sense. I don't know if people like it, but just technically speaking, it makes sense because we have a principle in Torah called Midah Keneged Midah. The Gemara says that God deals with man measure for measure. It's all part of the education process. Sometimes you can just punish because you angered me, I'm going to anger you. I don't care if it matches what you did. It makes you angry. This made me. So that's the Midah Keneged Midah. You made me angry, I'll make you angry. That's one way, but that's not usually the way God does it. God usually punishes the very thing that you sinned with becomes the source of the punishment itself. That's all also part of the tikkun process. And the Gemara, constantly we're looking for the measure in everything because we can learn from it and understand what to fix because of it. The question is, what's the measure for measure by Chava? What did she do? What was her sin? If you want to tell me that, she caused spiritual impurity to the world. Now because of her sin, Adam as well, but she initiated, right? So because of that, she brought death into the world, which is impurity. So now everyone's going to have impurity, have to deal with impurity. Okay, so she now, when she gives birth, right, she goes into Nida and she becomes spiritually impure. Okay, that's measure for measure. That's fine. That's what she did and that's what she got, right? But what about the pain of rearing children? How does it fit into the whole thing? What did she do in eating from the tree that was similar to that? And the reason why this question is important, because if we understand the answer to it, then we can also understand what Mashiach is about and why we have to go through what we're going through and maybe how to deal with it as well. So we have to examine it, take a look. So first of all, I'm not going to quote the pasuk from Baal Peh here a little bit, but it says the snake approached her and began to talk to her. And he says to her, I hear you can't eat from any of the trees in the Garden of Eden, because he knows that she can, but this is the way to provoke her and catch her off guard and unsettle her so she'll be more vulnerable to misinformation. People do all the time. This is what goes on in marketing media and the news today especially, right? And that's what the snake does. So she, no, we can eat from all the trees in the garden, but the one that the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that we can't even touch. Now, the truth is she's being completely accurate, because even though God didn't say that, but Adam did say that, so she hasn't missed the point yet. And the snake, and she says, because if we do, we're going to die. So the snake says, nah, you're not going to die. The only reason why God said don't take from the tree, now there's a big difference between taking from the tree and touching it and eating it. That's a question that has to be answered too. Like, how do you go from one to the other, right? So, he says you won't die, and he pushes her into the tree, and she touches the tree, and she doesn't die. Question. Now she's confused. At that point, it says that the tree was nechmad lenayim decho, and to a skill, understand, it looked good to her as food, and to get wisdom, to get understanding, to get discernment, haskil. So she took from the tree, and she ate, and then she gave to her husband, and then God comes and starts to do it. Well, first they make the clothing, and then et cetera, and then God comes. So actually, first he hides in the bushes, and the question is, like, why only now did the tree look good as food? She never noticed the tree before. Well, maybe she wasn't aware of it. She had to be aware of it. Adam said to her, you can't touch this tree. Which tree? I'm not telling you. Well, then you can't touch any tree, because maybe that's the tree you shouldn't touch. No, he's told us specifically that tree, the one that's into the Garden of Eden, the Eitz Hadas Tov Hara. You can't touch, you can't eat. That's forbidden. Now, the fruit of that tree is forbidden. She saw the tree. She saw the fruit. But it wasn't Nechmad Lednaim yet. Why? Because as far as she was concerned, until the snake came along, there was no shaykhis. It wasn't relevant. If you're not hungry, if you walk into a restaurant and you're hungry, on the way in, you look at all the tables to see what people are eating, to see what's on the menu, because you're hungry. It's relevant to you. All this is relevant to you because you might order it too. But after the meal is over and you're full, you walk right out pretty much. You open the fridge on a full stomach, you don't even notice stuff. Because since you're not really looking to eat, you don't really notice it. It's not relevant to you right now. You might not even go to the fridge at all. But that's what the snake did. Until the snake came along, it was not relevant to her. So therefore, she never looked at the tree in this way. But the moment that the snake spoke to her and told her and gave her an opening, even a teensy opening, because that's all he needs. A teensy, like the vacuum cleaner salesman just gets his foot in the door. All of a sudden, the tree appeared different to her. There was a relevance. So now the tree was nechmad lednaim. But the most important part was the skill, to understand. In this week's Parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu complains to Hashem and says, I can't do this on my own. No more. Right? It's just, there's too much. So God says, okay, we're going to make a Sanhedrin. We're going to appoint 70 elders to go with you. Now, to be in a Sanhedrin, normally, to be in a Beis Din at all, you have to learn for many years a lot of Torah. And you have to learn it well and be tested and become a dayan, which is not an easy thing to do, right? Not in the secular world, not in the Torah world. It's a lot of knowledge to know and to remember because you have to make decisions that affect people's lives. And it's even more so because it's moral choices here, affecting the whole world and the universe. It takes decades to get to a point where you can be a dayan, unless you're an Ilui, someone from a very young age, but that's a rare situation. So there's really no shortcuts. There really are no shortcuts. It just takes time to become a Talmid Chacham, become a posek, and you shouldn't do before your time. But in this week's Parsha, they didn't have time. Moshe needed the help on the spot right now. So it says, what did God do? He shared some of the spirit that he gave to Moshe Rabbeinu with the Zakanim, with the elders. And overnight, instantaneously, they got the knowledge. Not even overnight, on the spot. They prophesied, and they got knowledge, became prophets just like that. Short-lived, but there was enough to give them the knowledge they needed to function their position because the klal, the people needed it. Same thing about Yosef. Yosef had to know 71 languages to best Paro, who only knew 70 languages. He didn't know 71 languages the night before he was brought to Paro, until Hashem sent Gabriel down, and actually there's another way that how to happen, but he got an ibur of the angel Matat, and that gave him, because that angel Matat, he's the Sar over the 70 nations in Shemayim. So therefore he knows the 70 languages. So by him going into Yosef, who's tied to him anyhow, conceptually, so Yosef automatically became aware of all languages. Nice. I mean, I would love that. It'd be great. And we pray for things like that. But that's not usually the way it works. To become a Talmid, you get Siyata D'Shmaya, and you can advance faster in learning than your learning, would seem to allow, but not like that. Hard work already. But in general, it takes a lot of time to work. There's a mitzvah of Egla Rufa. Egla Rufa is a mitzvah that basically it's about what happens if you find a person murdered outside of the city. We don't know who did it. We don't know the culprit. So the city that's closest has to atone. It was their responsibility. So there's a process in the Parsha Shoftim where you have to bring an egel, a calf, to a area, a field that was not tilled and nothing grew there yet. And break its neck from the back, the arufa, like paro, same letters, and then you go down to the word in Rashi and say, our hands did not spill this blood. So the Gemara analyzes why all this. What's the point of all this? It says that you take an egel, which is yet it's not old enough to have they call it children, right? Calves. So it's fruitless. It's considered to be fruitless, so to speak. And you bring it to a piece of land that's also fruitless. There's still how this man killed surely, and therefore fruitless, or less fruit than he might have been able to produce had he still been living. Gemara says, well, if that's the case, and what about people who are too old to give birth to children or too young? We shouldn't do the Egel Roof for them? No, the Gemara says no. It doesn't mean children. It means mitzvahs. Because it also, but the main point is the fruit is a concept of something that you produce, and usually after considerable work and patience and waiting. There's a story in the Gemara with it takes 70 years to grow. It's the whole, but it takes time. And whether we're talking about children, whether we're talking about fruits that grow in the field, whether we're talking about wisdom, these are all fruits. These are all parents. And when Chava on the spot reached up and tried to get that on spot without going through the work and without taking the time and the procedure, which is really what the is all about, the process, she basically broke all the rules of creation. All of them, by doing that. So God says, because you tried to take fruit without waiting, without effort, you're going to have your own fruit as a result of waiting and a result of efforts. Mida connected mida, to rectify the situation. And the Nachash was the source of that advice, and because that's what the Nachash is. The Nachash is shortcuts. That's all he trying to get, really what we all want, but through cheating. Avodah Zarah, idol worship, is trying to have spirituality without changing yourself. Cheating. Shortcuts. I mean, all technology, AI today, but cheating. How to get the same thing that used to come through hard work and concentration and continuity. That's an important idea. How to get all that without having to do the work. That's Nachash. That's Yitzhahara. That's basically world history. That man, when the fax machine first came out, the whole selling point was there'll be more leisure time. By this fax machine, it had the exact opposite happen. It took away even whatever leisure time you had, reduced that in the end. That was a very bad call. But the whole Nachash. And as a result of that, she did the chet. If they only had waited 3 hours until Shabbos, it would have been permissible because the 3 hours would have been enough for the proper development of them and the world. Make it not only permissible to eat from the tree of knowledge of Diva, but a mitzvah to eat from the tree of. It would transform into the tree of life on its own through Shabbos alone. But she didn't wait, and she did the easy way. That's what the Nachash. That's what the snake does. So Mashiach is the same gematria as Nachash. Why? Because the Nachash, he put us into exile through all of this. That's what caused the exile. The whole philosophy, the whole shita. Mashiach uses the same process to take us out in the end. So, of course, there's a comparison between the process of how Mashiach comes and the whole birthing process as well, because they're one and the same thing. They're really part of the same picture. The whole story is all one story. That there's a process that's been going on for thousands of years to fix up that what took place and that was the chet. That was the main thing. As simple and as oversimplified as it may seem to be, that was the thing. That's what causes all this misery for thousands of years, because we have to fix it up. We've had to wait, and we have to go through Chavli Mashiach and all these processes that we have to go through in order to get to the fruits, which is Mashiach and the Messianic era. It's all part of the same idea. That's instructive. That's very instructive, because it shows you how individuals can be assisted. The Klal is not doing that. You see, the rest of the world, the vast majority of the world is looking for those shortcuts, trying to have fruits without going through the work, without the efforts, synthesizing, whatever has to be done. Is willing to do whatever is necessary to get to that level of fruit that we're here to produce. Because the Gemara says, very simply, the world was made for privy rivia. It was made for procreation. It doesn't just mean for the sake of giving birth to children. As we see from Noah, right? Dorasav, as Rashi points out, the main generations of a person are their Maisim Tovim. The more says the righteous people, even after they're dead, are still called living, and the evil are called dead. The righteous are living even after they're dead, and the Rishayim people are called dead even while they're still living. Why? Because the righteous people through their lifetime are constantly producing fruits. There's a second because it really is the essential point. whole concept of continuity and how Pinchas in Parshas Balak and Parshas Pinchas brings this point out, this idea and what we're trying to achieve. And if a person understands specifically what this means, then they themselves can actually rise above the world and not have to, the negative prophecies are going to come true. It just seems that way. That's what all the Meforshim seem to say. No one says otherwise. So who would argue the point? But it's also clear that individuals over history and today can actually change that situation for themselves, maybe their whole family, if they understand what it is that has to be done in advance of Mashiach coming. And just like righteous women, when the past in history haven't had to go through Chevli Leida, because whatever it was coming to do wasn't relevant to them, Klal Yisrael can do the same thing as well. B'ezras Hashem, we'll finish off with that next week. Okay, have a peaceful, safe Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi, for that. You've laid it pretty heavily on Chava, though, so I hope you can talk about Adam's part of this next week. Right?
Well, in this particular respect, right, we're only looking at one aspect of the punishment. You know, the other aspect of the punishment is also part of it. You know, I'll maybe make that point next week. But it's
interesting to hear.
He's the prime person responsible for everything. In the end, you know, he's the one who gets hit the hardest of everybody. But right now, I just want to understand the Chevli Mashiach aspect of it and how it relates to the idea of giving birth.
Right. Okay, so that's wonderful. Oh, that was really a great shiur about the Chevli Mashiach. But also, you wanted to point out probably that the Chevli also means a strand or a rope, doesn't it?
Chevel, but not Chevli.
I've heard this discussion that if it's a rope that we have to hang on to at the end of history, maybe it was just a nice, cute analogy. I don't know. But
yeah, no,
those who hang on and believe and keep believing will survive it.
That's 100% true. But it's not the main understanding of the situation. You know, listen, the Holocaust saw many of those people die in the Holocaust. It's never been, you know, Rabbi Kiva died at the heads of the Romans and all the 10 martyrs, you know. So like things like that, you know, I'd rather focus more on what you can count on than what is a nice idea. I'm not saying it's not true.
I thought that was like an equal idea. I didn't realize they were so vastly different in their importance. I didn't realize.
You know, it's interesting because, you know, by the Or Chaim, he says at the end of Parshas Bereshis about Noach matzah chen b'nei Hashem. It's very interesting. He says there's something He says chen is something special about it. That even though you don't have all the mitzvahs necessary, you don't have all the things that a person normally expect that to have to be able to survive, like, you know, divine destruction of the world with them. There's something unique about chen. He says that if a person has it, they can have a result that other people who might be in a higher spiritual level don't get. So it's deep. You know, you have to understand, you know, why that's the case. You know, there's the story of the Gemara, since we're on the topic, right, of Shimon ben Shetach and Choni Amago. And Shimon ben Shetach, he's the god of the door. And Choni Amago is asked to he's like a Bala Bayis in God's house. I mean, a Ben Bayis in God's house. So he's asked to pray to God to get rain. So he draws a circle and says, I'm not leaving the circle till rain comes. So a little bit of rain comes, you know, much. He says, that's not what he's asking for. So tons of rain comes. He says, I wasn't asking for that either. What's the point of having destructive rain? I want nice rain, right? So God makes it rain perfectly, and everyone's all happy, and then they have to get rid of the rain later on because they're getting too much rain in the end. And then Shimon ben Shetach sends a memo to Choni Amago and says, if you want Choni Amago, I put you in excommunication. How dare you talk to God like that? How dare you talk to God like that? Who are you? Right? He says, but what can I do? He says, you're like a son who sins, but whose father and mother, right, like him so much, they overlook his sin and treat him like he's the biggest tzaddik in the world. Now, the truth is, Choni Amago was the biggest tzaddik in the world. He was. You have to understand what the Gemara means. The Gemara is clue you into something. That there's something, you know, mitzvahs. It's more like Torah mitzvahs are not the end; they're the means. We tend to use them as the end, and then get disappointed when they don't give us what we want, right? But the truth is, they're only the means of something else. And if you don't know what it is, you can't be a chani amago.
Right, and you can't have so much kavanah for something you don't understand.
Yeah, exactly. But that's exactly the point. 100%. Okay, have a good Shabbos.
Rabbi, have a good Shabbos, everybody. Remember davening for our hostages, the end of the war, and our soldiers to be successful and no more losses. Thank you.
Amen.
Good Shabbos, everyone.